right. Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. January is already off to a great start. We started our first event of 2022 on Tuesday, and we are going to go straight through with 25, 30 or so live events before the end of the month. Great to have you joining us. Our theme this month is polar exploration. So we've been connecting with scientists, with researchers, with explorers, and conservationists who are working in these amazing polar regions, these biodiverse regions that we sometimes rarely get to see because of their remoteness, but they're being impacted twice as fast by global warming by the rest of the planet. So it is so important. We have people who are out there and documenting what's happening and bringing that to us here. So we've got a great speaker joining us live today. We've got Hugh Griffiths joining us from the UK. He's a marine biologist with the British Antarctic Survey. He has more than 20 years experience working in the polar regions, specializing in the Antarctic seafloor biodiversity. In sharp contrast to what we see on the surface, which oftentimes looks barren and isolated, if you get under the ice into the bottom of the Southern Ocean, it is a wild place with thousands of species, many waiting to be discovered, incredible biodiversity, and they're found nowhere else on Earth. So with Hugh joining us today, I think we'll take a little peek at some of that amazing biodiversity. So let's bring Hugh in here with us right now. Hey, Hugh, how you doing today?
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm good, thanks.
All right. Well, it's great to have you joining us. We always love stealing a little bit of your time. We've got a great group of classrooms joining us from across North America. I see many of them have already said hi in the classroom, in the side chat. We've got grade 2s in Thunder Bay. We've got on Pryor, Ontario. Mr. Mark Rick's crew in grade 4 is joining us. Some more Thunder Bay classrooms. We've got 4-5s in Sudbury, Ontario, 5-6s in Peterborough, Ontario. So great to see so many classes joining us. I do want to post something here just really quickly to put it on your minds, is if we don't get to your questions today, because it's a busy, busy event, you can submit some to this Padlet afterward. And I'll share that link with everybody as well. We want to make sure that we get a chance to ask as many questions as we can today. Hugh, that is more than enough for me. I'm going to let you take over for a little bit. We've got a little Kahoot quiz to do today as well. We're excited.
Brilliant. You'll be able to see that. Cool. So this is a typical idea of what most people think of when they think about Antarctica. And this is a picture I took sitting on a beach in Antarctica, and these two penguins came up to me to say hello. And the wildlife down there is not afraid of people. But this isn't all that Antarctica is. And I'll hopefully come on to that in a little bit. But first, before I tell you about what Antarctica is like, I want to show you where it is. So Antarctica is the big white blob at the bottom of the planet. So it's a mixture of frozen ocean and huge amounts of ice on top of a frozen continent. So to illustrate that, this is a satellite set of images of the sea ice around Antarctica, starting off at its maximum point, which is summer in the northern hemisphere, is winter in the southern hemisphere. So you can see that towards the end of September, the summer starts to come in and it starts to melt this huge amount of sea ice around the continent. And you'll see that it shrinks away quite quickly. And in winter, Antarctica is double the size because the ocean around it freezes. And it's a really cold place. So the air temperatures can be about minus 50 degrees centigrade. The water temperatures, the seawater temperature can be minus 2 degrees centigrade and still be liquid. And this ice is really important for a whole load of different processes and things that go on in Antarctica. But just remember, this big white desert that you can see in this picture isn't the only thing that Antarctica is. But life on land is really struggling. It's one of the harshest places for anything on land to live. Only 1% of the surface of Antarctica is free of ice and snow. And in some places, that ice is over a mile thick. So if you imagine traveling a mile and then thinking of that above your head, that's how much ice there would be if you were stood on the continent of Antarctica under the ice. And where you do have this tiny amount of ice-free land, you get some very simple plants like mosses, lichens, liverworts, and a very simple type of grass as well. And they really only exist in places where you get a little bit of water as well, because Antarctica is actually the driest continent on Earth as well. So it's the highest, driest, windiest, and coldest continent on Earth. So it's not the easiest place to live, even if you're a very simple plant. And then the biggest land animals in Antarctica have it even harder. So they have to live in amongst these tiny plants. So the biggest land animals are things that you wouldn't even notice in your everyday life. So springtails, which are tiny invertebrates, mites, tardigrades, and they're so tough they can live in the vacuum of space. And wingless insects are actually our biggest land animals. And that's it. And the Antarctic terrestrial or land biodiversity is very simple because the habitat is so harsh. But life in the sea is very different. The sea is home to around 20,000 species. And I say around because we're discovering new ones all the time. And if I was to ask you to name some Antarctic species, they'd probably fit into the 90 or so species that are what we'd call higher predators. So the top of the food chain, which includes penguins, seals, whales, those kind of things. And just to show off a bit from one of my expeditions, this is a set of photographs I took from the ship without ever even having to leave the ship whilst floating around the Southern Ocean. You'll see that the wildlife is varied. It's not afraid of people. It comes right up to the ship to see what we are because it's not really experienced contact with human beings because there's no native human population there. And penguins are the most abundant bird and the most common bird in Antarctica. There are literally millions of them. But there are about 17 different types of species of penguin in the world, but only 2 of them make the Antarctic continent their real home. And that's the emperor penguin, which is the biggest living penguin, and the Adelie penguin. And the emperor penguin is huge. It'll be as tall as some of you. It'll be about half the height of most adults. But my favorite Antarctic penguin is definitely the Adelie penguin. Adelie penguins are feisty, strong, not afraid of anything, and they're quite willing to chase animals twice their size away if it threatens their chicks or their eggs. And this is a video of a bunch of Adelie penguins who sensibly swam away when our ship came near. And I took this from the ship, and you'll see that they move incredibly quickly in the water like little torpedoes or dolphins. And then when they get to the land, they spring out and they turn back into those comedy animals we're used to seeing. And you'll see that one of them at the end goes completely the wrong way. But don't worry, he did catch up with his friends afterwards. There he goes on the right-hand side, flying off to the right. But he will turn around and go back, don't worry. And as well as the penguins, you remember I said there were seals in Antarctica, and there are 6 types of seals in Antarctica. The leopard seal, which is one of the top predators, the Ross seal and the Weddell seal and the Crabeater seal, which spend most of their times living on sea ice. And we also have fur seals and elephant seals. And now elephant seals are huge and can dive down to over 2 kilometers down under the ocean. And they can hold their breath for a very long time. And they're also built really well for swimming in the ocean, especially the cold water. They're very, very fat. And they can weigh the same amount as quite a large car. And the big males really are huge. The leopard seal is also another large seal. And it's the only Antarctic seal that eats other types of seals. But it also eats things like penguins, fish, and krill. So it pretty much eats anything. And you can see from the size of its mouth that it's got huge teeth that it's what it uses to eat those other animals. And crab-eater seals, many of you may not have heard of them, and they don't actually eat crabs, but early explorers saw them with red things in their mouth and thought it might be crabs, but actually it was krill. And they're potentially the most numerous large mammal on the planet. Estimates of anywhere between 7 and 75 million individuals living out on the sea ice. And here's a picture of crab-eater seals. At least 15 species of whales spend time in Antarctica, including the blue whale, the largest whale that's ever lived. And these whales here that I'm showing you in this video were ones that tried to race our ship when I was last in Antarctica. And they're called minke whales. And you'll see the white behind them is actually frozen ocean, like I talked about in the beginning. And they spend their whole time in and amongst the sea ice. So these whales are able to spend all winter finding air holes in the cracks in the ice, and that's how they live. And these whales are about 10 meters long, and they mostly eat small fish and krill. And they're also hunted by killer whales. And somewhere between 27 to 70,000 individual orca or killer whales live around Antarctica. And they are the top predator in the region. They are even known to eat the leopard seals, for example. And this makes up somewhere between half and 75% of the world's population of orca live around Antarctica all year round. And this is a picture taken from the jetty, so where the boat pulls in at our research station, where a mother killer whale was showing off her calf to the scientists. Now, this diagram is a simple food web to show you how important and simple this higher predator food chain is. So at the bottom of it, you've got tiny microscopic plants, which feed these shrimp-like creatures called krill. And then pretty much all the higher predators will eat krill, except for the killer whales, which eat everything else. So you'll see that krill is an incredibly important source of food. And this could be the most abundant animal in the world. There are literally billions of krill around at any one time. And they really do depend on that sea ice as a nursery ground and feeding place. Now, life in the plankton in this very cold water is very dependent on that sea ice, but also we have 24-hour daylight in summer in the poles, and we have 24-hour darkness in winter. So it's a bit all or nothing when it comes to the poles. And living in the plankton, there are around 700 species. And as I mentioned, the most important one of these is krill. It looks a bit like a shrimp. It lives for 2 or 3 years and is a couple of inches long. And it's even glows in the dark, and it occurs in huge, almost like clouds of animals. They're called swarms, like bees come in swarms. And these tiny plants that I talked about are up near the surface. The krill eat the plankton, and then they get eaten by all these higher predators and things. But they also turn those plants that wouldn't normally sink into pellets of poop that sink down to the bottom of the sea. And this poop is what feeds the life that I study at the bottom of the sea. And that makes up something like 19,000 species living at the seafloor in Antarctica. And here's a really pretty image of a whole range of animals that I've collected on various expeditions, from giant sea spiders the size of dinner plates to 50-armed starfish to sea cucumbers 1/2 meter long, and a whole range of corals and sponges and invertebrates that are really fascinating. And here's some beautiful images that you'd never think would come from the same place as those frozen icy images I showed you in the beginning. And you can see the color and the shapes. And some of these sponges are 2 meters tall and can live for up to 15,000 years. And you can see lots of relatives of starfish and things in these images. And what's really interesting is it's not only the krill poop and the tiny microscopic plants that sink down. Other things, when they die, like this skeleton of a penguin, when they sink to the bottom, nothing is wasted. Everything's recycled. So although it's sad that this penguin died, it's now feeding fish, sea urchins, starfish, all sorts of creatures at the bottom of the sea. And just to prove how many new species we find, these 2 pictures here are sea cucumbers. They're not very pretty, but one is called Colostoneura griffithsii, which is named after my surname, Griffiths. And the other one is called Euthrionellida huei. And Hugh is my first name. So 2 species that live in Antarctica are named after me. And I'm just going to finish up with a video that shows you what life at the bottom of the sea looks like from one of our robot submarines that did some videoing for us. So you can see very big sponges. You can see corals in this image. And there's a lot of other life, including a sea squirt. And then there's a little arthropod living on that and a tube worm in the background. Here's a fish that lives inside a sponge, and it's taking advantage of the light from our camera system so that it can spot krill and eat them as they swim past. This is a giant octopus, and in the background you can see an ice fish, which there's a news article just out about ice fish nests in the Antarctic, with over 60 million nests being found. And these sponges here are about 1.5 meters tall, and some of the large sea stars on them are putting their arms up into the water to catch krill. And these are swimming relatives of sea stars, and they're called feather stars. and they were finishing up on an image of sea anemones and sponges. And the big sea anemone that we finished on was about 1 meter across in that picture. So I'm just going to finish there because I know you're probably going to have loads of questions, but we've also got a Kahoot quiz coming up as well. But thank you very much for listening.
All right, Hugh, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. Antarctica just seems like it's just an incredible place. I can only imagine what it's like every time you go there and why you get so excited. Some people, the cold might keep them away, but if you get over that, you get to see a wild world that not a lot of people get to.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the amazing things for me is actually I get colder in the UK than I do in Antarctica because it's so cold there that it's dry.
Yeah.
And so the layers you put on, like the jackets and the thermal underwear and things, really work down there. So it traps a nice warm layer of air without that cold, damp feeling. Whereas I can cycle to work in Cambridge in the UK and get really cold, but I can spend hours out in the cold in Antarctica.
All right. And I must say that I'm a little jealous over here. 2 species named after you. That's pretty awesome. That is an accomplishment. Very cool, Hugh. As Hugh mentioned, we do have a Kahoot quiz. Let me share the pin. I've shared the pin in the chat already, but I will share it again up here on a banner in the main call. In fact, I'm just going to have to grab it again here. Actually, you know what? It's going to be easier if I just share my screen. So let's do that. There we go. So if you head to kahoot.it, it's going to ask you for a pin number. I'm going to share my screen right now, and let's bring in that pin number. So there we go. 944-5840 today. I can see we already have some students who have come in and joined us. If you have your own device, that's awesome. You can join right on your device. If you happen to be in a classroom and you don't, your teacher can pop it up at the front and you can shout out your answers to him or her. And then, yeah, we will get things going. So we'll give a few moments here to get some students in. As always, there'll be about 4 questions today, 20 seconds on the clock for each multiple choice question. If you're paying attention today, it's going to be a breeze. The faster you put in that right answer, the more points you're going to get. If you put in the wrong answer, but you did it really fast, well, that doesn't help you. You're not going to get any points for that. So a few more moments here. We've already have 50 students logged in. I see a few teacher names too. Very cool. And then we will get things going in just a moment. What do you think, Hugh? Are they going to be on the ball today? I have a feeling that they are.
Well, I've signed up to it too to see if I can test myself without having those slides to prompt me as well.
Excellent. I have a feeling that you'll be ready.
I'm not going to try and win though. That would be unfair.
Okay, I'm going to give it maybe 30 more seconds. See if we push 100 students. We're up at 96. And there we go. We're up over 100. So you can keep joining, but we are going to get things going right now. Here we go. First question. All right. How much larger is Antarctica in the winter with the sea ice? It doesn't change at all. Was it twice as large? Was it 3 times as large? Or was it 4 times as large? All right, couldn't fool this group. Most of the students went with twice as large in the winter with that sea ice. Let's see how we're doing on our leaderboard so far. Amia has the lead, but everything's really nice and close in the first round. So let's jump to our next question and see what happens. Which of these describes the continent of Antarctica? Is it the highest, the driest, the coldest, or all of the above? Got our answers coming in nice and fast. All right. Most students went with all of the above, which absolutely correct. You told us that at the beginning. And that's really cool to hear about kind of that dry coldness and how easy a bit easier to stay warm in Antarctica. Aiden shifts into that top spot. And wait a second. Is that you down there, Hugh? All right, let's get into our next question. 3 of 4. Which is not a seal in Antarctica? Is it the leopard seal, the harbor seal, the Weddell seal, or the Crabeater seal? Which is not a seal that you're going to find in Antarctica? All right, most of our students went with the harbor seal. Good job, crew. Let us jump into that final question here. Let's see what happened to the leaderboard. Sarah has pulled ahead, pulled into first place. Here we go. This is where it all comes down. Lots of movement on that board. Who is the top predator in Antarctica? I might be trying to trick you on this one. Is it the leopard seal, the elephant seal, the orca, or the minke whale? All right, couldn't fool you guys with that picture of the minke whale. It is the orca. That's awesome. Let's head to that final leaderboard and see where we are. Third place, Gabrielle, good job. Second place, we have Stephen M. And holding down the fort in first place, Bilal. Good job, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I had a sneaking thought that we might see Hugh just steal it at the end, but it looks like it didn't work out. All right, let's come back from that screen share and let's get into a little Q&A action. There we go, Hugh. What do you think? They did pretty well.
That was amazing, actually, really great, and much quicker than me, which just shows I'm either getting old or slow or both.
All right, good stuff. Well, those who are tuning in live via YouTube, use that chat sidebar to send us in some of your live questions. I can see Miss Blanchard's class in grade 6-7 are saying hi from Sudbury as well. I'm also going to share this link one more time because, time is limited in the event. So if you do have questions that weren't answered, you can head over to this Padlet and you can put your questions in there. I'll email the link to the teachers registered as well. And then he will join a little bit later, maybe Monday or something, and answer some of those questions for you. So we'll keep that up there for another few seconds. And for now, let's get into a little Q&A action. So we've got classrooms joining us. Most of them are joining us virtually today because we know there's a lot of virtual learning going on. So let's start with Miss Plant's class. There's some 3rd to 6th graders in Mississauga, Ontario. Let's bring Miss Plant in here with us right now. Hey, Mrs. Plant, how you doing?
Hi, doing well today. It was actually one of our students who I believe ended up in that first place, Bilal.
Excellent.
So I want to do a little shout out to him. We've been studying ecosystems and looking at different ecosystems around the world and sort of looking at how humans have impacted different ecosystems. One of our questions is what ways have you seen have you seen any human impacts in the Antarctic Ocean ecosystem at the forest floor?
Yeah, so it's really sad to say that I have seen it. So with the ocean ecosystem in particular, we see the kind of global impacts like climate change with the ice patterns changing and the water warming. But even on a more local scale, before I was a scientist, into the 80s, there was a lot of commercial fishing in Antarctica, which wiped out some fish stocks that are still only now slowly recovering. And also the same for whales and things, where there's been a lot of commercial whaling in the Antarctic in the past. And the whales are 100 years later, still only slowly recovering. But also we find things like microplastics and pollution and things down on the seafloor with the animals that we're looking at. And even on the beaches and things in Antarctica, you'll find bits of fishing gear and plastic bottles and things like that washing up even as far south as Antarctica. So there really is that kind of impact. But climate change and things is the big long-term threat to these ecosystems because some of these animals are adapted to live at -2 degrees centigrade. And if it starts to warm up, they might get too warm, but also other animals that can outcompete them that live in warmer water might be able to come into Antarctica.
Yeah, and a lot of those that we looked at, they don't have the luxury of being able to move as those changes happen, right? They're pretty tied to where they are.
Yeah, especially in most of the world, when it starts to warm up, things move towards the poles.
Hmm.
But in Antarctica, it's not even like the Arctic where the pole is an ocean, so you can keep going almost to 90 degrees. In Antarctica, you basically hit land at some point, and all these animals are mostly around that land anyway, so they've got nowhere to go.
Yeah. All right. We have a grade 2 class joining us from Thunder Bay, Miss Hiscock's crew, and they would like to know a little bit about the penguins. The first thing they want to know is how big is the Adelie penguin, and then they want to know what adaptations do they have? How are they able to stay warm in that really cold water?
So they're about a foot tall. I don't know why I'm looking down there as if there's an Adelie penguin to my left, but no, they're about a foot tall, and they have loads of really cool adaptations. So their feathers are not like normal bird feathers, they're incredibly densely packed, so that there's extra level of insulation. They've got a lot of body fat. So although we think of a penguin as not really having a neck, most of a penguin is a neck, but it's so surrounded with fat and that keeps it warm that actually you can't see that a penguin's got a neck and shoulders. And so they're very fat. They have really clever ways where the blood going out into their flippers or their legs passes the blood coming back in. So the warm blood heats up the cold blood coming in and it goes out cold. So they're not losing body heat into the ocean. They're putting their body heat back into their own blood as it comes back in cold. So that's a really clever way. Whereas if we went out in the cold, if our hands got cold, our whole body would get cold. For penguins, they have cold feet and they have cold flippers and it doesn't bother them. But their main inside of their body stays nice and warm. And they're also incredibly good swimmers and very good at catching krill and fish, which are full of oil, which helps them stay fat. So most penguins like to stay cold. And the Adelie penguins in particular can live in very cold conditions. And the emperor penguins are incredibly good at staying warm when they do a huddle. So when they've got their chicks and they're living on the ice, they huddle together into a big group. But because it gets so warm in the middle of the huddle, they take it in turns to stand on the outside because sometimes they overheat by being in the middle. So actually penguins are very clever at keeping themselves warm.
All right, that's great. And a great question from our grade 2s. Let's bring in another live classroom here. We've got Mrs. Gallen's crew in Guelph, Ontario, some 5th graders hanging out with us. How are we doing today?
We're doing really great. Thank you so much. That was really, really exciting. We have Sarah, who's really interested in the penguins as well, and wondering how many penguins there are. I was going to show my class if I could here. There they are.
There they are. Hey, everyone.
That's a good question.
How many?
Yeah,
That's the question.
it's really hard. So you'll see with some of the numbers I gave you about the numbers of seals, where it went from 7 million to maybe sort of 70 million, and the same with the orca in terms of, is it sort of 70,000 or is it 20,000? Because it's really hard with a whole continent. Antarctica is bigger than Europe. And we only have a few ships and a few research stations dotted around the place. So you can never count everything at the same time. And to give you an idea of how hard it is to count these things, we now use satellites to count penguin colonies. So that's like groups of penguins that live together, because it's almost impossible to count all the penguins at one time. So you can never add up the total. But my colleagues use satellite data, and they don't look for the tiny specks that are the penguins, but they look for what the penguins leave behind. So those very pink colored krill that I showed you, the little shrimps, the penguins eat those. And when they poop, they do very bright reddy pink poop, like rusty colored poop. And that, when you have hundreds of penguins nesting in one place, will color the ice a kind of reddy brown color. And that's what they use the satellites to look for reddy brown colors on the ice. And so by doing that, they found at least 10 new penguin colonies that we'd never seen before as humans, because humans had never been to that part of Antarctica. So counting penguins is getting more into the realms of science fiction now, where we're using drones and satellites to do it, because people on the ground, there aren't enough people, and penguins live in really difficult to get to places.
All right. Another example of how we're using technology to kind of learn more about our natural world. Very cool. Let's grab another question here via YouTube. There's lots of great ones coming in here. This is a great one. Miss McAfee's crew is joining us. They're grade 11s. They're a travel and tourism class. And they're wondering if you can kind of briefly summarize the process from, finding a new species to having it named after yourself.
Oh, so the main thing is you can't name a species after yourself. So these were two species that were named after me. It was a really nice honor to get that done. But to put it into context, we went down to Antarctica in 2016 was when that expedition happened. No, sorry, 2006, even longer ago. So 10 years before that, but it was about 2016 when they finally got published and given a name. So it takes a very long time. Because firstly, we collect a lot of things and bring them back. Then we have to find the right experts in the world. So they might be people, in this case, we were collecting them in Antarctica, bringing them back to the UK, and then sending them to people in Australia who are experts in sea cucumbers. And they work in a museum in Australia. And then they have to look at all of the animals we've sent them so that they can try and work out which ones are ones they've seen before and which ones are new species. And on that expedition, about 10 to 20% of the animals we found were new to science, which meant we had to find experts for almost everything. And with the sea cucumbers, it was crazy. They kept coming back going, we found another 5 or 6 new species. Can we name them after you? And can we name them after the expedition? Can we name them after your friends or whatever? Because Antarctica is a real frontier when it comes to these kind of things, where people have looked in a few places, but when you go deeper or when you go further around the continent, you find things that nobody's ever seen before. And for some groups of animals, it's thought that all the new species we've found so far might take 200 years at the current rate of description to give them all a name. So that gives you an idea of how many new species there are in Antarctica that we've never seen before.
All right. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us, Hugh. I think a lot of students think it's just a matter of, hey, that's new. Haven't seen that before. But it is, I've heard lots describe, finding stuff in the rainforest and taking 1, 2, 3, 4 years to get it identified. And yeah, with the backlog in Antarctica, that's crazy. It could take up to 200 years. And we're still finding more things to add to that backlog.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And especially if you go into the deep sea around Antarctica, well, the deep sea anywhere is really unknown, but the deep sea in the hardest to reach deep sea is full of life that we've never seen before.
All right, let's bring in another classroom here. Where should we go? Here we go. Let's go to some 3-4s in Coburg, hanging out with Miss Langer. Let's bring her into the chat. Here we go. Hey, Miss Langer, how are we doing today?
Good, thank you. So Ella in grade 3 is asking, can penguins fly? And if they can't fly, were they ever able to fly? And is there been an adaptation to them, over the thousands of years? That's what she's wondering.
That's a really good question. And actually, penguins have existed in Antarctica on and off for millions of years. So about 30 or 40 million years ago, there were penguins. So you can imagine that penguins are actually a very old group. So when they did evolve from flying birds, that was a very long time ago. And what's happened since is on multiple times, because most penguin species, when I said there were 17 species, most of them don't live in Antarctica. So at various times, different types of penguins have come and gone. There was one that was over 2 meters tall, so taller than most adults, that was found from about 35 million years ago in Antarctica. But we've got penguin fossils from all over the world, and there are penguins living today in South America, the Falkland Islands, the Galapagos, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. So penguins are all over the Southern Hemisphere, and they don't fly. They are related to flying birds way back in their history. But what they do now is they use those powerful wings as flippers. So they essentially fly underwater. So they're using the same muscles to drive themselves forward as, so unlike whales and seals and things, which have evolved from land animals where the back legs are pushing them forwards, penguins are still using their wings and flying, but only underwater.
All right. Another great question. 2-meter tall penguins. That would have been something to be able to see that. Amazing. We've got the Smith Smarties hanging out with us. They are a 5th grade classroom. How are we doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you very, very much. This is amazing. Learning lots. We are interested, Hugh, just how did you get interested in Antarctica?
I'm going to be completely honest now, and this is not the way that most people get into doing Antarctic stuff. I grew up by the sea. I've always wanted to be a marine biologist, even when I didn't even know what the words marine biologist meant. When I grew up, you could literally throw a rock from the back door of my mum's house and it would land in the ocean. And so I spent all of my summers, all of my winters, all of my weekends playing on the beach. So I always knew I wanted to do marine biology. And then I studied really hard in school and went to university and did a course in marine biology. And I remember as we were finishing the course, some friends of mine said, "Are you going to apply for this amazing job in Antarctica where you get to spend the winter down there and do scuba diving under the ice?" And my reply was, why would anybody want to go somewhere like that that's so cold? It's dark for 6 months of the year. You have to be away from your friends and family. And I really didn't understand what was special about Antarctica at the time. I really wanted to work on coral reefs and dolphins and all the things that people think marine biology is. But then I saw a job advertised at the British Antarctic Survey at just the right time when I needed a job. And I thought, well, I could do that. And I never expected to visit Antarctica with that job. It was supposed to be one working in the labs. But after I'd been there a couple of years, there was an opportunity for me to go for my first time to Antarctica. And I was already hooked by then. But once I got on that ship and started seeing icebergs and penguins and seals, and then starting doing the work where we look at the bottom of the sea, I would never look back now. This is the best thing in the world to me. But it does show that you don't always know where you're going to go in your career. And sometimes you need to keep a more open mind. Maybe I shouldn't have said no to applying for that job back then, but it's worked out brilliantly for me. But I just hope that if somebody had ever told me how amazing Antarctica was, then my life might have ended up here quicker. But it's definitely my favorite place in the whole world now. And that's completely different to when I was 21 years old and being asked, did I ever want to go there?
All right. I think, those are some important qualities of an explorer is, being curious and then kind of being open to trying those new things. And yeah, I mean, look what happened, that experience. And now you're hooked. Can't get you away. Any chance you're there. Very cool. All right. So Mr. Shattuck's crew, 6 through 8, hanging out in Chalk River. How are we doing today?
Oh, we're doing well, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully Abigail can ask a question for you. Abigail, if you want to go ahead.
Why do penguins waddle?
Okay, I heard that. That was why do penguins waddle?
Again, this comes down to them being so fat. So they've got most of their legs are inside their bodies. We only see kind of from the ankle down sticking out the bottom. And so they're really well designed to be compact and to swim. They're just not very well designed for walking. But waddling is a good way of walking on the ice. Not that you'd know it because they fall over all the time. They really are funny little creatures when they're out of the water. But waddling is, if you think about that, if you're on the ice, shuffling like they do is actually quite an efficient way of walking so you won't slip over. But it's not very fast. And penguins can run when they need to. And then it's less of a waddle and more of a sprint. But it's their little short legs are the reason why they waddle.
All right, let's grab one more question here from our YouTube crew. Lots of questions to choose from here. Okay, here's a good one. Miss Marcotte's class is joining in with us. And you mentioned at the beginning, I think you mentioned, JT, you wanted to know about the water. I think you mentioned it's about -2 degrees Celsius. Yeah. And then Morel wants to know any bioluminescence in the life.
Yes. So one of the really cool things is that we don't know all of the things that do bioluminescence in Antarctica, but every time we look, we find that almost every group of animals has some sort of bioluminescence. And the biggest one is krill. So krill is amazing in so many ways, but it also glows in the dark. And we don't know if they use that for communication or to confuse predators or a mixture of both. It may be a way like fireflies displaying for a mate. It's such a hugely well-known animal in some ways, and we know nothing about its bioluminescence really in other ways. But there are bioluminescent starfish, there are bioluminescent fish, there are almost every group of animal will use it, and some will use it to attract food, some will use it to scare off predators, like I say. So bioluminescence, especially when you get deeper in the ocean, so we have a lot of plankton that does it, but also when you go really deep, it's the only light. And so some animals will use it as camouflage, and other animals will really use it for hunting. And it's an amazing strategy, but also it's something that for the Antarctic, we're only just starting to understand.
All right, very cool. Okay, one more question from YouTube. Mr. Markwick's fourth graders are with us right now, and they're wondering, are you studying kind of a broad group, just kind of looking at the biodiversity, or are there a few species that you kind of focus on as well?
So for me personally, I study a range of animals. So I'm not one of those specialists who works in the museums where they have to count all the hairs on the legs of an animal to check it's a new species and things like that. I don't have the patience or the skills that they have, and I'm very grateful to them for the job that they do. But what I do is I look at the bigger picture, so the big patterns. So where do we find certain groups of animals, and why are they missing in other places? Where is it too warm for some creatures? Where is it too cold? What are things eating, and what makes some of these habitats special? And how long have they been around as well? So I work with friends who are paleontologists. That's people who look at fossils. And we have some amazing fossils from Antarctica dating back to when the dinosaurs were around. And we can see that some of the animals we see today in Antarctica are still there from that time, and others have evolved a lot more recently since it's got cold. And we can also use that to look at the potential for the impacts of climate change. So that's another thing I look at, is trying to predict what will happen to these animals if the water warms and if the ice disappears. So it's all about trying to work out big picture things, which makes me less specialist, but I work with a lot of specialists because you could never do it on your own.
All right. Well, Hugh, before we wrap up for today, I want to share a couple links. I want to share this link here to the British Antarctic Survey. If your class wants to dig a little bit deeper and learn more about the work of the British Antarctic Survey, you can visit the website there. So we'll put that up there and leave it for a few moments. And then, of course, I know we have tons and tons of classrooms joining us today, which is amazing. And if you would like to add some more questions here, I'll put the Padlet link back up. So padlet.com and then / our initials and Hugh, and you'll be able to find that. I will send that link out to the educators as well, so you can find it. Hugh, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an amazing career that you have. I think that's one of the great things about science, is science can take you all over the world and uncovering all these amazing mysteries. And anybody who thinks there's nothing left to explore or discover is way off base. We're just getting started figuring things out and exploring our planet and what everything means.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Amazing. Well, a shout out to all of our classrooms, whether you're on YouTube with us today. Thanks for taking part in the Kahoot and sending in questions. If you are a camera classroom today, amazing to see you as always. Thank you so much, everybody. And I hope everyone has an incredible weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.